Have you ever stepped into a room and felt the air shift, not because of what someone said, but because of what they didn't? There's a certain kind of presence that speaks louder than words. A stillness that commands attention without raising a voice. A calm that unnerves the loudest minds. A silence that doesn't signify absence, but quiet dominance. This isn't just charisma, it's strategy. A strategy Niccolò Machiavelli understood better than most. He knew that to argue is to enter a battlefield you never chose. A trap that strips you of something far more precious than victory, the upper hand. Every time you argue, you give up your frame. You hand over your composure. You expose what was meant to stay hidden. Because true power? It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't beg to be heard. It operates in silence, drawing others into its orbit without ever stepping into theirs. It's the kind of power that doesn't wrestle for control, it simply owns the space. Today, we're going to uncover why refusing to argue isn't a sign of weakness, it's a mark of mastery. A power move that shields your energy, sharpens your influence, and separates you from the noise. Stay with me, because learning this could transform not just how you handle conflict, but how you shape your presence in a world addicted to noise. Let me ask you this. When was the last time silence made someone uncomfortable? That's not a flaw. That's leverage. Let's talk about why arguing, no matter how right you are, often costs more than it wins. Machiavelli, the master of perception, understood a timeless truth that still slips past most minds today. Influence is not loud, it's calculated, in the subtle art of control. The one who argues is the one who bleeds visibility. Why? Because arguments don't just appeal to logic, they reveal emotion. And when you reveal that you're emotionally triggered, that you need to prove your point, you lose the invisible game of power. Those who understand the language of dominance see this need as the greatest weakness. It's not the sharpness of your words that gives you strength, it's the restraint you show by not needing them at all. This idea wasn't born with Machiavelli. It echoed through Sun Tzu. It whispers in modern boardrooms, political stages, and any place where real power hides in plain sight. They all lived by a similar code: never argue. Influence from the shadows. Lead without forcing. Because arguing doesn't persuade, it provokes. It pushes people deeper into the trenches of their own pride. Your words, no matter how clever, can become weapons they use against you, or shovels they use to dig into their ego-driven stance. Think about it. When was the last time someone truly changed their mind after being argued with? The more you challenge someone directly, the more their defenses rise, not because your logic is flawed, but because you've cornered their ego. And ego never surrenders easily. It fights dirtier, louder, longer. Arguments create enemies. They build walls. They make you appear reactive, desperate to be heard. But silence? Silence breeds mystery, and mystery is magnetic. When you choose to stay calm, when you refuse the emotional bait thrown your way, you send a signal. I cannot be pulled into your chaos. That you are above petty validation. That your peace is untouchable. That you lead, even when you don't speak. The powerful don't explain. They influence through their presence. They move others with suggestion, not force. They plant ideas like seeds, not smash opinions like hammers. And that, right there, is where true strategy begins. Up next, let's explore how Machiavelli's philosophy shaped this idea, and why mastering this silent strength is more important now than ever. Don't miss what comes next. That's the power of silence. It disarms, it disturbs, and most importantly, it protects. And it's no coincidence that both Machiavelli and the Stoics held restraint, not reaction, as the highest form of control. In the grand chessboard of life, the man who remains silent forces everyone else to make their moves without knowing his strategy. And in that uncertainty lies his greatest weapon. Because the truth is this: he who controls his tongue controls his fate. Where arguments expose the cracks in your armor, silence becomes the armor itself. Arguments inflate egos. Silence, it builds power. Real power. Let's look deeper into the hidden cost of arguing. The very cost that Machiavelli and the Stoic thinkers saw with ruthless clarity. The second you argue with someone, you've already crossed a line. You've entered their world, accepted their frame, their narrative, their emotional bait, and even if your logic is flawless, you've still lost something bigger. You've lost the mystery that once protected you. When you argue, you unveil your limits. You show where your patience ends. You let the world see where your ego burns, where your calm can be broken. Even if you win, you've stepped into the emotional battlefield where perception always overshadows truth. But the one who doesn't argue, he becomes a fortress with no doors. Unreadable, unshakable, untouchable. Just like the Stoics before him, Machiavelli understood that real strength doesn't roar, it simply refuses to be rattled. Silence, when used with intention, isn't passive, it's a mirror. It forces others to reflect on their own words, their own pride, their thirst to be validated, and in that reflective silence, they begin to unravel. Because most people don't argue in search of truth. They argue to gain control. To pull you into their emotional storm, to pit their strength against yours and measure whose voice is louder. But what happens when you don't engage? What happens when you remain motionless? They swing wildly at shadows. They shout at silence. They exhaust themselves trying to shake a presence that will not move. And that is the true nature of power, not in shouting the last word, but in never needing to speak at all. The man who observes more and speaks less holds a rare advantage. Because no one can predict him. No one knows what he feels. No one sees what he's planning. He becomes a question without an answer. A problem without a clear solution. And that mystery, that carefully preserved silence, is a shield stronger than any argument ever spoken. At the end of the day, the one who refuses to argue is not defeated. He is not exposed. He is not weakened. He remains unshaken, in control, while everyone else burns energy trying to provoke a ghost. We've seen how silence guards your power. But now let's go deeper. Why is it one of the most strategic shields you can ever wield? This isn't just theory. It's a truth that both Niccolò Machiavelli and the ancient Stoics understood at their core. In The Prince, Machiavelli advised rulers to present themselves as merciful, honest, just, compassionate, even religious. But behind closed doors, they had to be prepared to do the exact opposite if the winds of power demanded it. Why? Because appearance is a weapon, and argument is often the crack that breaks it. When you argue, you lower the mask, you reveal emotion, you reveal insecurity, you reveal bias, and in doing so, you give your opponents the one thing they need: an opening. An exposed thread they can pull, whether in politics, in negotiation, in courtrooms, or in the fragile networks of human relationships. That's why those who truly hold power rarely argue. They don't explain. They don't defend. Instead, they make simple statements. They offer subtle suggestions. They leave quiet hints. And most powerfully, they let silence stretch further than any speech ever could. Because here's the truth: words, no matter how carefully crafted, can be twisted. They can be misunderstood, reinterpreted, taken out of context, and turned into weapons. But silence? Silence is ungraspable. It gives the opponent nothing to cling to, nothing to twist, nothing to stab. Machiavelli saw an even deeper psychological reality. He knew that people might forget your words, but they will never forget how you made them feel. You may win the debate with flawless logic, but what remains afterward is far more dangerous: the other person's humiliation, their bruised ego, their resentment. And resentment doesn't disappear quietly. It festers, it simmers, it waits. Sometimes it explodes into rebellion. In leadership, this insight becomes even more crucial. The manager who constantly argues with his team slowly chips away at his own authority. The executive who justifies every move invites doubt. But the leader who listens more than he speaks, who moves without declaring his next step, who acts without defending his choices, that leader becomes a symbol. A pillar, stable, respected, trusted not because of what he says, but because of how he holds his ground. Take a close look at the most skilled diplomats in history, the sharpest negotiators, the generals who altered the tides of entire wars. They didn't waste their strength on arguments. They observed, they waited, they let others burn their energy explaining, reacting, and over-speaking, while they sat still, collected, patiently building leverage, and when they finally made a move, it wasn't emotional. It was precise, decisive, unforgettable, because in the real game of power, the loudest voice is rarely the strongest one. The strongest is the one who remains unreadable. The one who promises nothing, yet commands loyalty. The one whose silence draws others in without ever revealing his hand. In the end, your silence is not a void. It is your strongest stance, your highest form of control, your invisible influence shaping outcomes, without ever giving your enemies anything to strike. Previously, we saw that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. But now, let's take it one step further. Silence doesn't just protect you, it outsmarts chaos. It speaks the language of power far more fluently than any argument ever could. Both Niccolò Machiavelli and the ancient Stoics knew one thing with absolute certainty: before you can control the world around you, you must first control yourself. Master your emotions, and you begin to master outcomes. But what happens when we argue? When we rush to explain, defend, prove, or be understood? Without realizing it, we reveal something much deeper than the words we speak. We reveal need. We are pleading. In essence, we are saying, please, see it my way. But let's ask honestly, why should you need that? If your truth is unshakable, why must it be shouted from the rooftops? Why must it be wrapped in emotion or desperation? Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, would have smiled knowingly. He once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be." 1 centuries later, Machiavelli stripped away the moral frame and revealed the core truth. If your position is strong, don't argue, act, don't defend, demonstrate, because true power needs no applause, no validation, no emotional back and forth to justify its worth. It simply is, and so, argument becomes something else entirely. It transforms into a hidden form of insecurity, a fear that, without explanation, we'll be dismissed, a desperate attempt to anchor our value to the ever-shifting opinions of others. But the man who truly understands power knows better. He knows that approval is a currency that devalues quickly, and that real influence flows not from being understood, but from being unmoved. The most composed man isn't feared because he is loud or aggressive. He is feared because he is untouchable. You cannot bait him. You cannot drag him into emotional exposure. He does not argue to win the room. He becomes the room. Machiavelli's genius wasn't that he invented human nature, he exposed it. He revealed that what moves the world is not sentiment, but strategy, and in the realm of argument, his clarity was cold and sharp. Persuasion is for the powerless. Influence belongs to the strategic, because the moment you argue, you leave the high ground. You step into someone else's battlefield, under their rules, dancing to their rhythm. But silence keeps you elevated. When you observe instead of react, when you hold instead of rush, you let others wear themselves out while you conserve your force for when it truly matters. We see this everywhere in modern life. In business meetings, the person who argues endlessly, or sends long emotional emails, unknowingly reveals just how attached they are to the outcome. And with that attachment, their leverage slips away. But the one who listens carefully, who nods at the right moment, who speaks only when the air shifts, and the room falls silent, that person doesn't just get heard. They command respect, not by force, but by presence. We've seen how silence commands respect in public. Now, let's go even deeper into the realm of relationships, conflict, and the quiet art of emotional dominance. Because in the end, true influence isn't measured by how loud you are, but by how precise, how controlled, and how unreadable you can be. A powerful person isn't remembered for the noise they made, but for the precision with which they moved. Especially in relationships, because when argument enters the room, affection quietly walks out. Think about it. Argument turns love into territory. Every word becomes ammunition. Every silence becomes a minefield. What once felt safe becomes a war to win, rather than a bond to protect. But the one who refuses to argue, who takes a step back, recalibrates, and lets actions speak instead of emotions, that person doesn't dominate others, they master themselves. And that mastery is what sets them apart. Because real control? It's not about overpowering someone else. It's about being so grounded, so centered, so calm within yourself, that no one's chaos can pull you into their storm. In public life, the pattern is the same. The one who constantly argues on social media, who feels the need to clap back at every insult, defend every opinion, respond to every slight, they slowly become a figure of reaction. Not authority, they become predictable, drained. Their emotional map is fully on display, and therefore, easily manipulated. But the one who stays quiet, who lets the critics yell into empty space, who lets time, truth, and action be their only response, that person becomes untouchable. They cultivate mystique, and mystique is power. As Robert Greene reminds us, mystery is never an accident. It's a weapon, and this is key. When someone tries to argue with you, they're not just engaging in discussion, they're baiting you. They want to pull you into their frame, into the emotional quicksand where logic dissolves, and clarity becomes foggy. And the moment you step in, you lose. Why? Because now they control the tempo, the tone, and the terrain. You are playing their game. But if you remain still, if you watch without reacting, if you let their desperation to be right expose the cracks in their frame, you win without ever swinging a sword. Machiavelli didn't waste energy on fairness. He cared about results, and in the world of results, arguments are almost always a losing game. They inflate tiny sparks into fires. They turn mild disagreement into endless wars. They create enemies out of people who could have stayed neutral. But worst of all, they expose your emotional landscape, handing your reactions over to others like a map to your most vulnerable places. So what should you do instead? You observe, you listen, you absorb everything, but reveal nothing. You read the room like a general studying the terrain. And when the moment comes to move, you don't explain. You don't argue. You act, cleanly, quietly, without fanfare. You let the others fill the air with noise. Let them burn their energy needing to be seen, to be right, to be validated. Meanwhile, you remain a fortress, still, calm, collected, unshaken. And when you finally do speak, when you finally choose to move, your words don't enter the fight like arrows. When a truly powerful person speaks, their words don't fall like an invitation to debate. They drop like a hammer, precise, final, undeniable, not to convince, not to negotiate, but to end the conversation before it ever takes form. This is the ultimate Machiavellian move, the Stoics' discipline in action, to refuse to argue, to speak only when it matters most, to let silence say what anger never could. Why? Because silence can't be twisted. It can't be quoted against you. It can't be defeated. It floats above the chaos, untouched by the desperate need to be understood. In the end, the one who understands this truth knows that their sharpest weapon is not argument, but indifference. And within that calm, calculated indifference lies an unshakable advantage no storm of words can breach. Refusing to argue commands respect. Let's dive into the hidden strength behind this restraint. a power that both Niccolò Machiavelli and the Stoics deeply understood, but one that few today have the discipline to wield. The true power of silence lies not only in what it prevents, but in what it creates. It creates space, a vacuum, one where your words are not diluted by desperation, where your presence alone becomes weightier, more commanding, more magnetic. In a world that confuses noise with value, silence becomes the rarest and purest signal of power. Machiavelli, with his ruthless clarity on human nature, saw this perfectly. Silence isn't absence, it's tension, it's gravity. It draws people in. Arguments, on the other hand, push people away. They scatter your energy, expose your emotions, and reveal the triggers others can manipulate. Each time you argue, you surrender leverage, but when you remain composed, when you speak less and move with intention, you turn silence into an invisible force that bends the room around you. Think about it. A colleague challenges you publicly, expecting a reaction. If you argue, you validate their spectacle, but if you remain calm, respond only to what matters, and shift the focus from emotion to outcome, you dismantle the conflict before it even begins. You don't defend yourself, because you're not there to perform. You're there to produce, and in that rare stillness, people lean in. They listen more closely. They respect you not for what you argue, but for what you refuse to explain. Or take the emotional partner, lashing out, trying to bait you into their storm. Now, let's see what happens when you face a storm of emotion and choose not to get swept away. When someone lashes out in anger, yells accusations, or creates a whirlwind of emotion to pull you into their chaos, if you respond with rage, you've already lost. You've lost your position of power. You've lost your inner peace, your frame, your quiet strength. But if you remain grounded, calm like a rock in a storm, if you speak only when necessary, or stay silent until their fury burns itself out, then you remain in control. You don't win by overpowering their emotions. You win by refusing to be pulled into them. Even in today's digital battleground, social media, that public arena of instant outrage, the same principle applies. The moment you start defending yourself against petty insults and criticisms, you hand over your authority. You no longer lead, you react. And Machiavelli would remind you, those who must explain themselves have already lost standing in the eyes of the crowd. In this arena, silence is not weakness, it's filtration. It separates what deserves your energy from what doesn't. It turns provocation into background noise. But why is it so hard to stay silent? Because the ego whispers in your ear. The ego wants to be right, to be seen, to be the last voice standing in the room. And when you listen to it, you get pulled into battles beneath you, arguments that don't elevate you, but diminish you. The Machiavellian mind does not feed the ego. Instead, it uses the egos of others. It watches, silently, as people reveal their insecurities, their impatience, their need for validation, while it remains untouched, unfazed. It simply observes, because every argument you avoid gives you priceless information. The more others talk, the more they reveal intentions, weaknesses, blind spots, and the less you say, the more you become an unknown quantity. And what do people fear most? Not what they understand, but what they cannot read. Not because you're hiding something, but because you've mastered what they haven't even begun to control within themselves. Here's the paradox. The man who refuses to argue often ends up with the most persuasive power. Why? Because silence cannot be debated. It cannot be refuted. The man who doesn't argue isn't surrendering. He's observing, calculating, choosing. And when he finally speaks, his words are few, but they're heavy, cutting straight through the noise with sharp precision. His silence isn't retreat, it's artillery held in reserve, ready to strike at the moment it truly matters. And Machiavelli understood an even darker truth. When you argue, you are teaching your opponent how to manipulate you. Every defense you give, every emotional crack you show, gives them insight into your psychology, what you value, what you fear, what provokes you. In their hands, that becomes a weapon. But if they can't provoke you, if your calm remains intact despite their efforts, you deny them their greatest advantage. You become unreadable, and the unreadable man is the most dangerous man in any room. Let's not forget the key lesson from before. Silence doesn't mean you never speak. It means you only speak when your words serve a strategic purpose. The Machiavellian mind isn't reactive, it's selective. And through that selectivity, it earns a form of respect that cannot be begged or demanded, it must be felt. Just look at how this plays out in real life. In personal conflicts, when someone throws accusations at you hoping to drag you into their mud, your calmness becomes their frustration. In debates, when others launch verbal attacks and you respond not with defensiveness, but with clarity, or better yet, with silence, you control the room. In leadership, when crisis ignites panic, the leader who doesn't over-explain, who acts with quiet decisiveness, becomes the pillar others rely on. This isn't a theory. This is how real influence is built. Even in warfare, Sun Tzu taught that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, to win without arguing, to overcome chaos not by matching it, but by rising above it. That's Machiavellian warfare at its finest, psychological dominance without emotional expenditure. So how do you apply this in your everyday life when challenged? Pause, breathe, let the tension rise, without feeling the need to release it. If you must respond, do so with calm, finite phrases like, "You're entitled to your opinion," or sometimes, say nothing at all. Let them wonder, let them doubt, let them talk themselves into exhaustion. In digital spaces, don't engage unless the conversation serves your long-term purpose. You don't owe your energy to every critic, every comment, or every provocation. Silence isn't defeat, it's a deliberate filter, keeping you focused while others drown in noise. In relationships, refuse to mirror emotional outbursts. Refuse to justify yourself when unfairly attacked. Instead, slow things down, create space, choose your response, not from emotion, but from a place of composure and command. And in business, don't defend, deliver. Let your results speak louder than your explanations. Let your execution, your proof, your consistency, be the loudest voice in the room. Because here's the final, undeniable truth. You don't need to win arguments when you've already mastered yourself. When your confidence comes from within, not from applause. When your peace is anchored inside, not dependent on public approval. When your sense of value is rooted so deeply that no insult can shake it. That kind of person, who doesn't flinch under provocation, doesn't chase praise, doesn't argue to be noticed. He doesn't demand respect, his stillness commands it. At the end of the day, the greatest displays of power aren't found in shouting matches. They're found in the man who sits still, calm, unprovoked, undefeated, while the world yells and thrashes around him. That man, the one who refuses to argue, wins battles most people don't even notice. He doesn't lead by demanding attention. He moves with quiet certainty. He doesn't influence by seeking approval. He influences by embodying a calm so unwavering that others can't help but follow. He's not afraid of being misunderstood, because he understands something far deeper. Disciplined silence speaks louder and hits harder than 1,000 desperate words ever could. If this message resonates with you, make sure to subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. Insights that go even deeper into mastering yourself in a world that constantly demands your reaction. And if you've made it this far, leave a comment with the words, "Stay silent," a quiet reminder of the power you already carry within. So remember, stay grounded, stay patient, stay untouchable.